It is.
Oh man.
It might be an alternate universe version of you.
Yeah,
Like just to warn you before you meet
That's
him.
right, exactly. It's like Earth S or something.
Yeah.
Right.
Awesome. Okay.
Cool. Well, I don't mean to moderate. In fact,
Yes.
I don't want to moderate.
Absolutely. I want to.
Somebody do it.
Yeah, because I want to get this. Because I don't want it to turn into like this weird rambling thing. But basically, just to start, what I wanted to do, or what I've been doing, or what I've done for like the last year, and I finished in January. I gave myself a time limit. Was what I called the 1972 project, and what that came from is one day I went into the comic shop and.
Should we be telling this story while we're recording?
Yeah, we're recording right now, I believe.
Oh, we are? Okay.
Yes.
So we already started. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I've got Ron's recording, I'm recording. We've got redundancy, which means that neither one will actually work. And at the very
Carry
end,
on.
yeah,
Carry on, Senator.
that's right. Thank you. So anyway, I had like these boxes of comics that a friend of mine, Esteban, gave me, and a lot of them I wasn't going to use.
I remember Esteban.
Yeah, and so it was a lot of like, and I had inherited them because sometimes you'll just go buy like long boxes, as you know you're wont to do. Of course, everyone does that. But so I bought these. So I had like all these Gene Autry comics and all these Pat Boone comics and
Right. Weird shit.
just stuff that like I wouldn't appreciate. But my comic shop owner, he knew that one day we were talking, and he knows that I'm a big Jack Kirby fan, and he was like, "I will give you an entire Commandy collection. You know, let's make a trade."
Commandy is
right.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yes.
So he goes and he finds all the Commandy comics. I bring in the long boxes and he trades them, and he says, "Yeah, I can use these because I collect comics from the year I was born, which was 1956 or something." And there were plenty of those comics in there. There were, and I'm like, "That's a really crazy idea." So you know, we talked, blah blah blah.
Naturally, you liked it.
Yeah, and I'm like, this is the most awesome idea because one, it's something you can do. It's an excuse for like collecting, you know, comics. Two, it will
True.
resonate culturally with the person doing it because you will see that artifact from when you were born or the year you were born. And if you dive deep enough, you can find the comics that were made or that were printed or published the month you were born. And it was really neat, and it was actually kind of fun because, and I made rules for myself. One rule was that I could only collect comics I found in comic shops, and I couldn't go online and just buy comics.
Oh, no click.
Right.
Yeah.
Which
That's tough.
Which unfortunately I broke the rule once, and it hurts a little bit, but I was going crazy by the end, and I couldn't find this one.
Feel
comic.
bad about it. It's hilarious.
Right.
What was the one issue?
Well,
The sin.
yeah, I'm going to show it to you today because
Okay.
there's no
Okay.
way we're going through this entire stack today. This is obscene. But
Right.
so I could only buy them at comic shops. I could only buy them at comic conventions, or if I could find someone, we could make trades and so on. But it had to be done as organically as I could. The other rule was that when we buy comics and when we listen to music and when we watch movies and when we do anything, there's a time in your life where everyone kind of comes of age and realizes you have a self-realization of who you are. So you might go, you know what? I'm really into Prince. And that will become your guy, as it is with mine or whatever, you know, Fishbone or so you figure out who you are. Like I'm a Teen Titans guy, or I'm a Legion of Superheroes guy, or I read for me, like with science fiction and fantasy, I really love the Daw and the Tor novels that I would buy at Walden's and B. Dalton Books when I was a kid. And you would commiserate because you only had $3, and this book cost $1.95. And you're like,
Seriously.
oh, and you're like, I could maybe buy one of these and maybe a magazine. And so, like, you know, as a kid, you know, and I was a really poor reader actually originally. I'm an incredibly poor reader. I had to go to like special reading classes, but I could always read comic books. Which really upset my mother because, you know, I would come home with really bad grades, but, you know, I could, you know, I'd have all these comics around that I could actually like read, parse, and so on. But, you know, once I did start reading, the comics or the books that I really liked to read were those crazy fantasy novels from like the late 70s, early 80s, because that's basically when I became aware. So you would read a lot of just weird science fiction and fantasy that you really don't see anymore now because everyone wants to write their 3 books and do all their world building.
Singing my song here, man. Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
that so with the comics, it had to be comics that I would read if I had become aware, came of age in 1972. So, so when you go into the comic shop, when I'm looking for these comics, it's like, okay, Jerry, you're like 15 years old. It's 1972. You're obviously incredibly rich because you can afford more than 2 comics. I can afford more than, because, at the time, comics were 20 cents. And that was the key thing to look for.
Just a little after that, they had that big burst on
They
the
did.
cover. Still only 25 cents.
And
Right.
and there's history behind how that happened too. How Marvel like swindled DC into like basically keeping their prices low while they raised their prices. And there's a lot going on. But 1972, I found out while I did this, there was a lot going on. There was so much cultural craziness in comics and a lot of subversion and just stuff. And by doing this, I got to see a lot of stuff that like I was aware of, and even stuff that I've read before because I've had comics and collections and back issues before. But when you go back and you read these things now and see what they were trying to do, and if you look at it with kind of a jaundiced eye, you see so much stuff that is in between the frames and the panels that as a kid I was unaware of. But as an adult looking at them, you're like, wow, I can see what they're doing here. I can see what's going on here, and I can, when you're an 8-year-old kid and someone says Agnew, you don't know who that guy is. You're just like, okay, Captain America's talking about something. It's obviously important, but no one knows. I don't know who he is, But as an adult, and looking back, you kind of understand it. Also, I play a lot of role-playing games. So if you and listen to a lot of music. So these things are like my love, and I can cross-pollinate between them, between comics and between movies and between role-playing games, and even music you can infuse into this too.
Oh, well, absolutely, especially in 1972.
Yeah, there is a ton going on. You had at least music. You had kind of like the tail end of like the psychedelic stuff. The Beatles had broken up like that year. Marvin Gaye released What's Going On, which was, a super awesome concept album. And in May, I was born.
Right.
So
Uriah Heep tearing it up in the UK.
Yep. You had a lot of really crazy like progressive rock. You had kind of like the nascent stages of like what punk rock would become like 4 years later, with like Velvet Underground, the MC5s. You had all sorts of stuff going on in the early 70s that would turn into something awesome later on.
I was going to say, should we jump now to each other's year?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And then we can then each of us can sort of do you for the
right.
For like a couple of the favorites, because there's catalog for each of us, of course.
Oh,
we can add that as a file later, right?
Yeah.
So people can actually see the list.
Oh, yeah.
If they want.
Absolutely.
But that way we can, maybe each of us can okay. Anyway, so you say 72?
Yep, 1972. 64. Man, that's old. No. That's right.
Is that one of those things we edited out?
I don't really. No. Yeah, that gets left in.
Really
Exactly. But 64. Jason?
68.
68.
So while you were talking about music, in April of 1968, which is when I was born, Mary Jane Watson gets a job as a go-go dancer.
Actually, was that the cover where Spider-Man's getting beat up and she's like, it's like a split
dancing.
Cover? Yeah, and she's dancing. Is that it?
That is exactly the cover.
I own that comic.
Lindsay?
88.
Awesome.
88. So someone there.
Contrast.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's funny because right now upstairs I'm reading comics from the New Universe. And yeah, no.
You read my blog post on that. It's actually pretty interesting.
Yeah.
I was really into the New Universe when they were coming out.
Yeah.
That came out at a time when I was just coming back to comics after kind of a long time away.
Mm-hmm.
You and me both,
And I was interested in, it was like something that, the idea of sort of doing realistic superheroes,
right?
They weren't actually, but that was sort of the pitch for New Universe. So I had every issue of Starbrand, man. I was, and now you look back and it's just painful. But at the time,
absolutely, it's absolutely.
At the time, I was
for me, yeah.
I remember being very frustrated with the comic. We're way off topic now. But I remember being very frustrated with Starbrand because I felt like I knew where I wanted it to go, and it wasn't going there. It was very stubbornly refusing to do cool shit.
Right.
and I remember.
I gotta bite my tongue. There's so much to talk about why that is. So clear, but we got it.
Before we filibuster, though, like Lindsay.
Yes.
You're our X factor here. You're the one who's gonna look at like all of these old dudes, and then like
what do you mean look like?
Yeah, I know exactly. It's gonna. But like, what do you? What's your thing from 1980? If you have to go back into the archives, what?
So I think
let's start with you.
I think the super iconic one is The Killing Joke.
Wow, that was 1988. Man,
yeah, that's 88.
That doesn't seem so far away.
Right? Yeah, don't do the math to figure out how old I am. So that one I think is also super iconic, and kind of ironically for what's coming out here in a couple months, it's also the first full appearance of Venom is in 88.
Wow.
And so I think that we get like two strands that are influencing comic culture a lot right now.
Right.
In terms of like the kind of Alan Moore effect and everything.
The effect he didn't like.
Yeah.
Well, I always say about like Alan Moore, I'm like, the best thing that happened to comics in like the mid to late 80s was Alan Moore and Frank Miller. And the worst thing that happened to comics in the late 80s was Alan Moore and Frank Miller. Because after that, everyone wanted to do their Frank Miller and Alan Moore book. And it ruined comics. Well, I shouldn't say it ruined comics, but it tainted it to the point, it poisoned the well a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
they're still struggling with those books today. I mean, you ask a lot of people, like, what's your favorite comic? And they'll say Watchmen. And Alan himself, he stopped answering questions about Watchmen 20 years ago.
Right.
Can't we just move on? He himself has said it would be a huge insult to current comics creators for me to think that they cannot come up with something better than what I wrote 30 years ago.
Yeah.
No, absolutely.
I feel like Watchmen is kind of like the infinite jest of comics, in that like it's the thing that like every guy in their early 20s tells you that they're really into to seem like super deep and cool.
Right. Yep. It's
and some people are genuinely into it, and some people are like just saying that they're into it so that they impress you.
I have never actually finished Infinite Jest.
Yeah, me neither.
I wouldn't be surprised if the number of the people in question haven't finished the Watchmen in any sense that I call reading.
Yeah.
Right.
We read it, but often we have to go back because you had that first level where you read it and it's like, oh, Rorschach is so awesome, right? And like that, because he like breaks people's fingers and and then you go back and you realize, okay, Rorschach is a psycho.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
For Rorschach.
There's to talk about Watchmen for a sec is really, I mean, it's so dangerous to do in a comic book reading group because everybody what was said about it at the time. There was actually a journalist who made a huge deal about comics finally grow up.
Yes.
And really got into that. It hit the mainstream news cycle. And now, I don't know if you know this, but all through my life, there's always been an article coming out saying comics finally grow up.
Right.
It's every single year. And they always have these.
Usually it starts bow Pam.
I was just about to say it. The fucking headlines always say bow Pam. Is that Bam? So there's that. And they always say the same thing, and this one hit the news cycle, and it was all about Watchmen, etc. I claim that Watchmen is more of a callback to the early 70s Marvel in terms of tone and intensity and social challenge, rather than something that comics had not been doing. And so, in other words, it is very good, but it actually isn't. Like, he didn't come in and invent something for comics.
We should do a Watchmen panel someday.
Oh, absolutely.
That'd be fun.
Absolutely. So we've got actually, you know what we forgot to do? Really, we're gonna have to do it at the end, is basically introduce ourselves so that there's context to who we are and why the hell people should actually watch this. because
hey man, editing is editing. I'm
beautiful.
Jerry, introduce yourself.
Yes, but okay, so like, yeah, you had The Killing Joke. That's a big one. That's and that one, oh man, that one. There's a spot of me that really likes that comic, and a spot that really does not like that comic. You know, it's.
Lindsay, what do you think of it? What's your deal?
So there's parts of it that I really enjoy. I really kind of enjoy the back and forth that we get between Batman and Joker in it. Right. I like the kind of background of like him as like the failed comic and like kind of stumbling into crime. What you'll probably find out about me pretty soon into talking to me is I'm very big into like feminism. And so it's also one of the biggest examples of fridging a female character in comics history.
The archetypal fridging, right?
Yeah.
So
literally getting fridged, but
besides like Kyle Rayner, this one would be the fridge before there was a Kyle.
Yeah, exactly. And so that, and it's not that I'm against violence against women in comics in terms of like, yes, women are also existing in the comic world and will also sometimes get hurt because we live in a comics world. But I really hate how it was basically her injury is a point towards her father and a point towards Batman. Like he's not injuring her because she's Batgirl. He's injuring her because she's Commissioner Gordon's daughter and she answered the door.
He doesn't even know that she's Batgirl, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
She's just some random nihilism. That's That's
and so, and I know there's like a lot of backstory about like how that came about and how, you know, the publishers were like kind of uncaring of her. And I do like what they turned it into. Like I think Oracle is like one of the cooler, like making lemonades out of lemon stories in comics history. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I actually have a personal take into that precise phenomenon. I really hate to do the name droppy thing.
Go for it.
But right at the exact time we're talking about, I was spending a lot of time with John Ostrander and Kim Yale.
Oh, nice.
And we lived in Chicago. And I spent a lot of time, obviously, you know, I was a huge Grimjack fan, and we spent a lot of time together. So anyway, when Killing Joke came out, Kim had many views. And it's actually kind of interesting because she did not shy away from the squicky or the you know, the psychologically damaged. But she was very invested in having those things be presented more like human reality and less like Hollywood tropes of insanity.
Yeah.
So therefore, you know, the gleefully cackling psycho of the slasher, you know, the bad slasher movie or whatever was not where she was at. And so anyway, so I saw, if you will, the creation of Oracle.
That's really cool.
I was looking at those. I don't know if it's been, I hope I don't get anybody into trouble for saying it. I was looking at the pre-production pages of the Suicide Squad. You know, and Kim was like, what do you think of this page? And it was the one where there's the little Batgirl doll, you know, at on the clue, you know, the clue page.
Yeah.
And so I'm like looking at the black and white, you know, to you know, she said, check out this page. What do you think? You know, without. And so but the point is that I really had it from her voice at a personal level exactly what was going on here. And it's precisely as you say, it's like, this is heinous. It's heinous, not in a pearl clutching way at all. It's heinous in terms of much more general story. This is a story that isn't really very good, you know, and so we're landed with it. And now, just like all comics creators have to do, how many comics creators are landed with some kind of ridiculous shit, you know, in the backstory of whatever it is they're not going to run. And you know, they've got to go, what am I going to do with this? And so it was kind of an opportunity, but it was really a very it was like, look, we have got to go through this. She has got to have physical therapy. No, she's not. They even have a whole thing in the Suicide Squad, the technology that allowed Ravon to walk with a broken back isn't applicable here, and here's why. You know, and so it's I mean, so I'm lucky. I was able to do,
That's really cool.
the comic book fan's dream that you're actually
Right,
now can remember all of the personal dialogues and head scratching and whatever. They made their decision. I'm not saying I participated. This decision was made without me, of course, but the dialogue about it at the personal level, talking about the Killing Joke, literally, a couple years before Oracle shows up and saying, aha,
right.
We've been
That's
talking
really
about
cool.
this for a long time. So yes, that is a big deal. I hated The Killing Joke,
Right.
and I actually always have. I consider it a lazy story. The insight isn't much of an insight as far as I'm concerned. It's a pretty familiar one. And I like the way John Ostrander put it too. It was like, if you're going to call a book The Killing Joke, could you at least pick a joke that's funny for the joke part,
right?
And so that's another criticism. But really, I thought it was I'm a heretic. I don't really like the Joker particularly.
Right.
In general, I can't think of any particular Joker storyline. And I went back and I read them from my more favorite writers from the 70s. People when Steve Englehart and Archie Goodwin and Danny O'Neill were writing the Joker. And I was like, is there anything good in here, really? And the answer is no. They all like Two-Face.
He does. He gets a lot of love.
And they liked a lot of the other villains a lot better, I think. I mean, I don't know the people, so I can't say, but you can read it and say that the Joker is, they decided to make him this scary psychopath to, ramp up the darkitude. But this back, long before Miller. And, but they didn't really make the Joker very interesting. They never really did.
Right.
So I just don't think it's a very strong book to take a character who no one ever really could make work except as a great visual counterpoint to Batman. But what on earth really? I mean, if he's a killer clown, then where's the clown? I don't see any clown. I mean, and if he's this murderous psychopath, then ultimately you're going to have to get away from this whole thing of, only the murderous psychopath can see the hypocrisy of society, man. And I'm just so over that shit. And, for it to be played up again in the movies and everybody around me is falling all over themselves about how awesome this is. And you're like, really? Aren't there better stories than, can't you reach a little higher hanging fruit?
I'm going to just speak up and say that I although I acknowledge Lindsay's absolute concerns about the book and the fridging and everything, and it's become a huge problem. And I like the book a lot. I taught it. My students reacted really well to it in the classroom. What I found interesting was to compare the ways that it's been colored differently over the years. The original coloring of the book was changed to make it kind of less psychedelic. Right. The colors were muted, and it was made a little bit more easy to read, not as garish. So I like looking at the original coloring and kind of letting it go. And I think the characterization of the Joker is pretty excellent in that book. And it helps us. I mean, one of the things that I think Alan has always tried to do in a lot of his books is to try and make everybody a sympathetic, identifiable character. And so the Joker we come to see his whole point is to prove that anybody can turn into him, right? Anybody can go crazy if they just have one bad day. And ultimately what it is kind of a desperate move on his own part to explain himself, right? He's like trying to say, look, I acknowledge that I'm crazy and I've done all these terrible things, but anybody can get there. So
it's not just me.
It's not just me. Yeah, exactly. Sort of pointing to everybody else and saying, well, and he's kind of desperate. Ultimately his plan fails, right? He doesn't drive Batman. He doesn't drive Commissioner Gordon insane. And so ultimately his quest for forgiveness for his it fails. I have found it interesting that debate that came out with Grant Morrison a few years back, who insists that Batman kills the Joker at the end of that book.
Right.
That silhouette, that famous silhouette scene, is the Batman choking the Joker to death.
Yeah.
And his Grant Morrison's famous line, it's in the title, guys.
Right.
But I don't think I buy that. I think it's an interesting way to read it, and I wouldn't put it.
If nothing else, Grant Morrison is very good at manipulating text.
Yeah, right. And he's got plenty of beef with Alan over the years. Right. Anyway, when I first read that book, Lindsay, it's a great choice. It was Boland's art, though, that blew me away.
Yeah, well, that's beautiful.
Yeah,
yes.
Boland's art blew me away, and I knew Boland from Camelot 3000. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Which I read sitting in the aisles of Save-On drugstore every month.
Didn't he also do Black Knight?
Oh, totally.
He did, but I was not. I was reading. I didn't have much of an allowance.
Right.
I could only
absolutely.
comics.
Well, yeah. Come on. I remember when comics went from what was it?
But Save-On.
Oh no, I was just saying, like, when comics would price up, and then you would go, ooh, like 30 cents.
It was a life change.
Yeah,
it was a life-changing event.
And you're like, oh. And I remember when they went to 50, you're like, dang it, okay, I can get 2 comics, 60 cents.
Yeah.
Now I'm gonna make a gut check.
What I had not seen from Boland, though, was that deluxe paper and the ink quality,
right?
Printing.
Right.
The Camelot 3000 stuff was just, I mean, it was what they called it back in the day, which is a bad name, and I'm glad they changed it. Lindsay knows what I'm talking about. They called it a little bit better quality.
Editing.
Yeah, a little bit better quality in paper, but it was not that that deluxe kind of printing that that we got with Killing Joke. Anyway, that art just blew me away, and then Boland went on to do the covers for Wonder Woman for like 50 years, and I did not care how bad the interior of those books were. I bought every single one.
Right.
Damn.
Yep, he did, and he also did stuff for, I think, Epic magazine with Miranda the She-Wolf.
Oh, he did a ton. I knew his stuff more image, or rather by style, than by name.
Yep.
So that when I started seeing the work here and there at DC, what with the whole Brit influx, I was like, oh wait, okay, yeah, that guy that never quite clicked until I eventually went back and kind of pieced it together a little bit. But I'd seen his stuff in snippets, all over the sort of pop culture, the Brit stuff, the all the auxiliary stuff from the mainstream comics titles that a lot of people were in before they get into those.
Yep.
Should we work backward to a year or two to the next?
Well, what I wanted to say too about the Killing Joke and like the fringing thing, also, like, and I'm not sure if Longbow Hunters came out 88 or it was close, but they did the same thing. Basically, when they come and they slit Black Canary's throat, they hang her up, and I think they rape her.
Hook.
Yeah, they hang her up and they torture her. And then I can't remember the villain, but I remember reading that because I was, let me see, what I had to have been if it was 88, 86, 87. It was around then because right after.
No, it totally was. It was right in that zone.
Yeah. And I remember going, wow, this is, as a kid, because I was like in my teens, it was like, this is pretty intense, man. It's like, the
comics got super rapey. Right.
They did. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like, it was huge.
Yeah.
The only one that Kim and I talked about that was not like, what on earth is going on here, right? Which was kind of my response. But the one that stood out as real story to me was in Martial Law. The first issue of Martial was the only one where this was presented as a human problem about humans.
Right.
The others, like the one you're talking about, they go straight into.
Well, it's all shock.
Straight into gore porn.
Well, it's all sensationalized and shock, and it actually the same thing with what I was talking about earlier is that there's a cross-pollination from like movies and stuff, because a lot of movies during that period, like the action movies, like you had
Golan
like
Globus,
yeah,
all the way.
Yeah, any canon movie, any Globus movie, it was always, here's how we show the villains are really bad, is because we will beat up a kid, shoot
Blow
someone's
up your dog.
Yeah, kill the dog, or we will rape someone. And then at the end of these things, there's always a big explosion. Usually, like, there's a woman in there, too, with, like, a huge gun with her shirt open, and she's shooting the gun at someone.
But the trouble is all this purported moral ambiguity is not ambiguous anymore when that happens.
No.
I mean, the way they played it up in the Longbow Hunters is, oh, no, Oliver Green's considering killing someone.
Right.
Oh, no. Oh, how ambiguous. How tortured. And you're like, after that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
what,
you took it to 11.
What are you talking about?
Yeah, you turned it all the way up, so now it has to happen.
I think I've missed parts of the conversation.
People are they're dropping out. I think we're getting too intense with the internet.
That's right. Lindsay, check your camera. You want to click your camera on and off? And then,
1 sec.
No, you're good. You're good. Don't do anything now.
Okay.
You're good all of a sudden. I'm sorry. There was because of the connection, there was an utterly unacceptable interruption of your voice.
Right. Truly did. Yep.
So start over, please. We don't want interruption.
Yeah, you started.
No, it's okay. So just, I think that, I forget who said it the first time, but basically, like, the easiest way that you show that someone is evil is by hurting a dog or raping a woman. And I think that, like, that's where, as you guys were saying, both comics and movies went in the late 80s for a long time. And then we got that weird way where, like, rape was supposed to become somehow empowering to the woman.
Right.
Like, she became a superhero because she was raped.
Right.
And, like,
and you know,
definitely, like,
yeah. And
go ahead.
Yeah, you know what's fucked up about that, too? Is that I think people actually lose their shit more when they hurt the dog.
Yeah.
Like, people will be like, they killed a dog, and it's like, wait a minute, did you see, like, this guy was like, he killed like all these kids, and he's raped, and it's like, yeah, but he shouldn't have killed that dog, man. That was the last one. It's like, you know, and but you know,
so I think
that's your year. Then.
I just want to say, Cass really hates that scene.
Oh, look at this! There we go.
He says your priorities are messed up, Jerry.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, is it a female dog or a male dog?
This is Miss Tessmacher.
Oh, well, you know, if you wanted to be really evil, you would rape and kill a female dog, and then people would go like, "Oh my god!" But what else?
Jerry, you went there.
Listen.
And this is
so I Am Legend. Like they reveal in I Am Legend that the dog is a female dog, and that actually made people feel worse.
Hold on.
Like they were like,
"Are you serious?"
That's what So like people like I was in the theater and like the dog's name is like Sam, and the dog dies and everyone's like super sad, and then they're like, you realize I think he calls her like sorry girl or something
Samantha
like that.
Or something,
Samantha, and it's like she was a girl, and like suddenly everyone feels like even worse that the dog is dead. I'm like,
no, please, is that true?
Yes, that happened.
Oh, I gotta get my rocket ship and leave.
Jerry is aborting from the planet Earth.
Yeah, it's just crazy. But so what else do you got from like 1988, or do you have?
So the other kind of big milestone one is it's the start of the Inferno crossovers for X-Men.
X-Men, okay.
And I don't have like the time or energy to track all of that. Yeah. Like there's a lot going on that I just don't totally understand.
No,
but
you're right, because by then they became a mess. The X-Men was a serious mess. And
oh God! Ever since the Mutant Massacre, or a little before that.
Well, which one though? Because remember, they killed them all. And then like a year later, it's like we're gonna kill them again, and it was like, And that's essentially when I tapped out. By Inferno, I would see it on the rack, and I would kind of have some interest. But yeah, like that
was exactly when I did that same.
Yeah, it's my heyday was like, like John Romita Jr. had started drawing the X-Men. I had stuck around for a while, and then by the time Mark Silvestri like jumped in, and that's kind of when like I had lost interest because it was
that was the first big mutant massacre right there.
Yeah.
I remember that.
Well, yeah, because they had
yeah.
what were they called, the Reavers or whatever they were, the guys running around.
I forget what they called them. They went after the Morlocks. Anyway,
Yeah.
we want to talk about swamps to go wading in, comic book wise.
Exactly.
But that was right around then. That's for sure. Wow.
I think, Jerry,
so
you remember we had a long conversation about when I tapped out of X-Men. I bet you remember. What was it that happened to X-Men that made me quit the book?
What happened? Gosh, I can't remember. What happened?
When they cut off Storm's hair and gave her the mohawk.
That's early on. That's early on for that. That's like 84.
I was a kid.
You're an early lever.
Yeah, I was. I came back later on, but I was like, "What?"
Right.
Like, it was just so crazy to me, and I'm like, "Okay, I put it back."
That's whole worlds to debate and discuss here.
Yep.
I mean, Jerry and I have talked at length about whether Storm is a black woman at all.
Yeah, true. It's I could. I've got notes. I've got
There's a PowerPoint somewhere.
Yeah, there's a PowerPoint. I could absolutely go into it.
I skipped all of the Inferno. I mean, I remember it being on the shelves, but I never read.
You honestly didn't miss anything because there's nothing that's there that's referenced. You know, like there'll be callbacks to like a seminal story, like the Kree Skrull War. Only like really 6 issues, but that thing rocked the entire universe.
And it seems like every couple of years we go back to the time that Galactus ate the Skrull homeworld.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. There's stuff there that you know that's important. Inferno, absolutely not important. You know, no one cares. 0 Hour, no one cares about. War of the Gods, no one cares about. But there are things that people will call back to, and it makes a difference. And actually, I'd like to pull it back to me.
Yeah.
Because seeing as that I'm the most important person that I know, I will, you know, like for instance, like
I'm just working over the philosophical.
That's right. Like in 1972, the comics that I wanted to showcase, or the ones that like I would have read, or the ones that I've read now, or actually I read them a while ago, are like you know, Jack Kirby. Like you had like the Forever People. A great. It's such a great concept.
Space hippies gold.
Yeah.
Boom tube.
This is the thing about Jack Kirby that I love. Now, Jack Kirby is a genius, or at least I consider him a genius. The guy was like a dynamo. He could draw like crazy. He came up with so many crazy concepts. Now, was he a great writer? No, but if you look at like the body of his work, you can see everything that we're still using today. Jack Kirby had a hand in. He there's DNA of Jack Kirby in everything, and like the Forever People. And what kills me is that a lot of people will try to do the Fourth World stuff now, and they completely miss it. One thing, here's a rule. This is the Jerry Grayson rule of the Fourth World. No one runs around and punches Darkseid in the face. You know, but you know, now they use like Darkseid as basically, he is just, when Darkseid first shows up, he's always in shadow and he's behind the scenes and he's always doing his weird machinations on whatever he's doing with his anti-life equation, which you never get codified. And it's always something he's trying to do, but you really can't understand why he's doing it. And to me, that was great. It's like, what is the anti-life equation? I don't know. You know, it's whatever, you know, Jack Kirby says it is and Darkseid is looking for. You don't have to know. You just know that if, you know, Darkseid gets a hold of it, it's bad. And in a lot of comics now, they will try to quantify everything. And they do this in role-playing games too today. And I'm guilty of doing it too.
Well, there's more of a need for it in a role-playing game than a comic because players want to quantify.
Well,
I dispute that.
Well,
but go on.
I've got like a few reasons why I would like to actually go back. For instance, I really like Gamma World. The original Gamma World books, or even original like role-playing game manuals. Like, remember when you got a box and it had 2 books in it, and both books were like 60 pages apiece, and you could run games forever.
I didn't say you had. I didn't say you had to quantify everything. I said that the players want it.
Yes. Well, and you know what?
I'll agree with. Yes.
I think. Well, and it's the same in comics as well. As I think we're trained to want it now. I think it's been beaten in our heads that this is what we need, but not necessarily what we were looking for or wanted. And Jack Kirby, to his credit, he painted with huge strokes. So he would give you the kind of idea of it, and then he would move on. Because if you read any of his stuff, especially Commandy from each issue would jump to a completely different idea. And they tried to emulate it last year with, or actually this year with the Commandy Challenge.
Yes, I read some of that.
Yeah, and they kind of did it, but with the Forever People, what I really loved about it was that, it was basically space hippies who come to Earth and they're trying to do their good thing, but it's such a weird concept, and they do this, with the weird Voltron thing where they all combine to the Infinity Man, and
which back then was not as given. By after the 80s, everybody in the world knew all about joining up into a great big dude. But this back then, that was not.
Yeah, he made like this Gestalt like superhero that didn't always show up either. It was like when the Infinity Man showed up, it's almost like he had his own agenda. It's like, it was a neat idea, and no one ever really catches up to Jack Kirby. And what I love about it is that Jack Kirby went for it. And he was unapologetic about it. Where, some people, like when you, for instance, like when you're designing role-playing games or even writing a comic book, it's like, well, should we do this? I don't think people understand. Jack Kirby just figured, you'll catch up.
It won't surprise anybody, and you guys probably all already know this, but Kirby was deeply tapped into pop culture at what I like to think of at the most authentic levels. If he and Stan Lee weren't hanging out with a bunch of college agers all the way back in the mid 60s, I mean, they totally were. And not only that, Kirby was pals with Frank Zappa. I mean, he was not sitting in a room somewhere, with just exploding out of the center of the brain, or rather, he probably was, but he was also in touch with people who genuinely felt that they were speaking out. They were just speaking out, and authenticity was everything. Coherence was not the top priority. But authenticity was, and I think Kirby is right up there with the rest of that community.
Well, he also had a deep well of just a lot of disparate information that he had collected. Like there would be weird Jewish Gnosticism stuff, or Gnosticism, and the Jewish just like when you read the New Gods, you can see it. I mean, you can see it even in the stuff he did with Fantastic Four. You can see it. His love of mythology and religion and the Eternals.
Well, his interest in the space astronauts who came and affected history goes all the way back to the 50s. I mean, he was always into that.
Well, yeah, and the Celestials are, that's the receipt. He's basically or even with the Kree and the Inhumans, and there's that back and forth between Kirby and Stan Lee, who created what.
Let's not go into that.
Yeah, exactly. But
dangerous waters.
The language of that debate is already borked.
Right. But the thing is when you look at his output, even after he left Marvel, his output at DC, his output at Pacific, the stuff that he created when he went back to Marvel, the stuff he did, just stuff. It's just crazy. And no one's ever been able to catch up with the science fiction, with any of the characterizations he would do. I mean, Terrible Turpin, he introduced him 2 issues before, kills him, and you're like, oh man, you're like, I love that guy, But when you look at it, you're like, the guy was only around for a couple issues, and Kalbach just beats the crap out of him and kills him, and we remember it. Everyone knows who Terrible Turpin is, and the guy existed for a couple issues,
Right.
That's one issue that I have.
Great. All right.
I know I have to machine gun through these and stuff.
You notice me and Lindsay both get comfortable.
Yeah.
Like, all right, we're in
Exactly.
for it now.
Then we have like Captain America, and this is Captain America 145. Captain America and the Falcon. Written by Gary Frederick, who would write Ghost Rider. He would do this awesome run on Black Panther with Jungle Action and the pages of Jungle Action, which no one talks about, but people should, because if you have not read Marvel Jungle Action.
Panther's Rage is Don McGregor, though.
That's right. Fuck. Yep. You are absolutely right. Which is, Gary Frederick wrote. Besides this, he wrote.
There's a ton of stuff. He was one of the heavy hitters. He was one of the really sort of disorganized wordsmiths of Marvel. And he was always bombing on and off books and like dropping the ball and coming back and blowing you out of the water.
We will come back to Gary Friedrichs when we get to me.
Oh, awesome.
Gotcha. Good enough. Yeah.
I wanted to read, because I was talking to Jason about it earlier when we were trying to test out how this thing was going to work. Because basically in the 70s, everyone, they were trying to put their best foot forward, but a lot of times they would end up just putting it in their mouths because they would characterize.
I value the effort. I totally value the effort.
Well, it's like, because I was telling Jason about this. Basically, in this comic, Captain America and Sharon, they both get a call in the middle of the night from.
That's a famous page.
Yeah, from.
That's one of the most famous wordless pages. Yeah.
Yeah, they get a call from Nick Fury, right? Nick Fury calls them, and they have to get in there, right? And it's so funny because on the next page, you read, and it's basically Nick Fury grousing about Sharon. He's like, "What in the blazes is taking them so long? Blasted broad screams for equality. Then when we give them a chance, they can't even get here on time for a red alert, right?" And I'm like, we give these blasted broads equality.
Yeah, but let's just have a little modern translation. Asterisk, asterisk, caption at the bottom.
It's
what he really said was.
Yeah, it's like we give these blasted broads scream for equality, and they can't even get here on time. It's like,
yeah,
I'm like,
there's a couple of interesting things about this, though. Number one, it's hilarious too that Steve Rogers isn't there yet either.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Number one, but also. It's also worth pointing out, depicting, this isn't meant to be an apology. This is meant to say,
right.
They're attempting, I think, to say Fury is a sexist.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
This is my author response to my understanding reader response.
Yeah.
We both look at each other and say, yeah, those blasted broads. No, we're saying, no, Fury is a sexist. Steve isn't.
Right. No,
that's what's really going on here. But
you can absolutely see it. The thing is, though, is that throughout, because one of the things too is that some of these comics, like when I collected them, I never, some of these I've never read, and then I went back and read them, and when you read them now, you're just like, man, this is, they're trying to do something, and it's fun because some of it is just zany, because there is no limiter, there's no one telling them they can't do it, and they're just going for it, and that's what I love about it.
Oh, the edit, this phase of Marvel is great.
Yep.
The editorship is in complete shambles, and this is 72 is actually before the shambles. Thomas is editor, but he deliberately makes it a writer's shop.
Oh no, he's like
Carmine Infantino made it like an artist shop over at DC at that time.
No, he's kind of
over here. It's a writer's shop. You got Jerry Conway, you got you got McGregor, you got Englehart.
Yep.
All of them are free.
Don't forget, you had Starlin coming in. You had a lot of people who were and that's when you in the mid 70s. I wish we'll do the mid 70s next. But it gets really crazy, and then you can see it starting to fall apart, and you can see the wheels come off by the late 70s. Because
I've written about that extensively. I know, it's pretty.
But clear. Some of these, let's just blaze through them, the New Gods. This right here, this comic, not necessarily this one, but this comic series, Zelazny's Lords of Light.
Yeah.
these two things have blown my mind and have informed me on a lot of stuff that I do. Anything that you see in a role-playing game that I've written, I've stolen from Jack Kirby and the New Gods. I love the New Gods.
Changed the way I read science fiction. It was
What's
the most
that?
important book I ever read.
What's that?
Lord of Light.
Oh, Lord of Light's one of the greats.
Yeah.
It was the most important science fiction book I ever read. It changed the way I read the genre.
Yeah, it blew my mind. And people, they love Amber, but Lords of Light is my jam. Immortal, I love. Lords of Light, I love. Amber, kind of boring to me.
No,
sorry, guys.
I just blogged about this a minute ago because there's a in 1968, Von Bode and Zelazny collaborated on a kid's book.
Wow.
And it was not published until 1994.
That is crazy.
And I mean, it was only published in 1,000 copies and have vanished.
Oh no!
See that thing?
I have number 519.
You don't.
And
All right.
and so anyway, well, it's a very, very good example of a lot of things. But one thing I mentioned, Zelazny's pop built on the latter day reception of Amber, starting sometime in the 90s.
Right. Yeah.
Rather than, I mean, his real heavy hitter books, Creatures of Light and Darkness, happens to be my favorite.
Right.
But it's in that same zone,
Yep.
you know, of Lord of Light. And so it's a good example. We lose text
Right.
culturally. Text vanishes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all about what so-and-so said about it. And then and you position yourself
right.
socially
Mhm.
about that. It's like the fridge thing. We're
Yeah.
so busy talking about fridging, we forget to talk about the killing joke.
Right.
I mean, and no slam on anybody. I'm just saying that's the way pop culture works.
Yeah.
Is
Right.
we forget the text
Yeah.
entirely.
Yep.
And yeah. And signposts for fucking status among us. I mean, can't we come up with something more interesting to care about? But the thing to go to the ones you're talking about, the New Gods as text and its relationship to the counterculture. For me, this is very, very deep material, personal. The artificial distinction between the 60s
Right.
and the fact that there is no such thing whatsoever. Most of the visuals that people call the 60s are actually the 70s. And
Right.
so you end up in this case with one of the great anti-establishment pieces in Kirby's work at DC
Right.
around. And yet we mine it for villains. You know, once you
absolutely.
fold that stuff into the Legion of Superheroes in the 80s, we're done. That's gone.
Right.
You know, and now the Forever people are sort of quirky, funny. They're played for a little comedy, played for a little this and that. They were the butt kickers of the New Gods.
Yeah.
Orion never kicked as much ass as the Forever people. And if you read it, they're morally 100% right.
Right.
They never drop the ball when it comes to handling threats or assessing problems or anything like that. Kirby loved hippies.
Right. Well,
And
you saw him in what was it, Jimmy Olsen's pal, when you got the Harrys, when they went to the essentially the town that dropped out, like
Right.
it's like near Metropolis. They go there and it's just this counterculture, like they're just living in trees. I forget, were they called the Harrys?
I
I
think
don't
so.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, it pops up a lot, and just weird commentary. I mean, you know, we'll have to talk about OMAC later, but OMAC is just crazy. But let me keep going.
Sometimes I think his drawing hand just kind of went over there, and he was like,
Yeah,
"I have to
exactly.
talk now.
Yeah,
I have to
exactly.
talk now. I
Yeah.
better say something."
Exactly.
I showed images from OMAC to my students, and it just blew their mind.
Oh, when you see that first
Like,
cover,
what on earth am I looking at?
that first cover is that one right there.
The pieces of the women in boxes.
Yep. Have you?
You know the panels I'm talking about.
I'm a little bit lost, I admit.
Yeah.
All right, so
that's cool. That's what
early,
we're talking about is this text disappearing. So yeah.
Mhm.
one of these early scenes in OMAC, One Man Army Corps, is a factory in which they construct female robots to be people's friends.
Right.
Oh, fabulous. That never ends poorly.
Yeah, this can only end.
Now, this is the dystopian future, and the main character works at he works at this factory And it is weird when you see the cover because they come in these. It's like a suitcase-sized box with their legs on the side and their heads are sticking between them.
Yeah.
Goodness.
Yeah, I know. It's really
when you see
there.
It is crazy.
I don't want to send you the picture, Lindsay, because you're going to have to see it for yourself.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And by the way, you're welcome.
Oh, thank you. I wasn't feeling quite emotionally damaged enough today, so I figured I needed a little bit more.
When I first saw the cover, because when you do, everyone who sees it, you do a double take. You're like, wait, what am I looking at? Because it is the weirdest. It's a fever dream. Jack Kirby is a fever dream.
No, totally. Especially OMAC.
Yeah, the OMAC stuff.
On this
and and if you can find it and read it, it's really good. Even though it's written like Kirby, because Kirby is not a very good writer, but if you can parse what he is doing, you're like, this is actually some of the best. Like some of his best stuff, I think, is the New Gods, OMAC, and probably the Eternals. The Eternals is probably the most coherent.
That's really fascinating. Whenever you use the word "best" in a comics book discussion, everybody just starts.
Right. Yeah. Well,
and so I'll just.
Eternals was the one that he basically had done the same idea like 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But exactly.
Kind of.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
Well,
he had gotten.
So, I'm sorry, Terry. Jerry? What is the I'm so excited. I'm like spinning all my words in all the wrong places. Yeah, I know. What other titles? We're not doing all of them. Are there any others that?
Oh yeah, I've only got 3 more. That I wanted to talk about. So, did Ron drop out? Or is it me?
Okay.
Yep, we're all here. Everyone. Oh no! Now we lost Lindsay. I feel like I'm maybe I'm moving too fast, like the Flash, and now everything's just slowed down. So, who else is here?
Oh, if you have that problem, click your camera on and off.
Hello?
Both ways. Can you? Okay. No, he's back.
Am I back?
Also, my landlord does not pay for good enough internet.
We're all on.
We're all here.
Hello?
Come back. We're all here.
I'm here.
How about Jason? Yeah. Okay, so everyone's here, even though Jason is okay. Beautiful. The next one I've got is an Avengers. This one is Maximus doing his inhuman skullduggery to the Avengers, and the Avengers are falling for it. I'm not sure who.
Englehart, isn't it?
I'm gonna say Englehart, but let's see.
Thomas. It might be Thomas. I have to.
Roy Thomas and Neil Adams art.
Oh yeah. Oh, there you go. That's a classic. Triton coming out of the manhole.
Yep.
Yeah. This is the callback to the cows, I think.
Cows.
The famous callback to the cows. There was. This is Marvel geek stuff that just does not belong in my book.
Right.
Okay. There are things that could be on this shelf where this is
right.
That are way more important. But suffice to say that if you go back into the early 60s and you count the number of scrolls that got turned into cows, there was like there was a miscount in the dialogue in the panel or whatever. Roy Thomas was obviously just having fun when he used scrolls from the issue as the motor for this storyline. And everybody loses it because it's so continuity. And yet it's old school continuity. You're just picking up stuff because it's fun.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
And
not mandated.
John Byrne uses it too. And my favorite Fantastic Four annual when which I turned into an adventure and a Godsend Agenda supplement.
Were they all turned into X-Men?
No, it was the one where basically people are getting sick from drinking the milk. It was a dairy town.
Yes, the milk. Milk. Yeah.
And that was that issue was so fun to me. When they have to go back to the small town where they put these Skrulls out to pasture. Didn't think about that people might actually use them as dairy cows. And people are drinking Skrull milk. It was a neat issue. But anyway, moving on, we've got Black Bolt and the Inhumans.
Amazing Adventures.
Yep, and it's got a Gil Kane cover. This was the reason why I bought this one. I was like, oh man, Gil Kane. I honestly don't remember what happens in it. They end up in, like, I think they're fighting Magneto in San Francisco or something. It's kind of forgettable, but I enjoyed reading.
This is in Magneto's like blue period when everybody has no idea what to do with him. It's before Claremont kind of reboots him in the early 80s.
He's kind of,
and nobody knows what to do with him. He's just wandering around being goofy and crazy.
He twirls his mustache,
and
and being like, like a mutant racist essentially. It's always and this is the one issue. The next is the last issue that I want to show, and this issue right here. This is what pops everything off for me. This is the issue that I had to go online and buy. I could not find this issue for any reasonable price.
Oh, I saved it for last.
Yes.
Okay. Very sin.
Now, this is the thing. Before this time, there was really only one black superhero, and that was the Black Panther. You had black people.
I knew this was coming.
Yeah, you had black people in comics. You had Gabriel, who was a part of Sergeant Fury's Howling Mad Commandos, who wasn't really black so much as he was painted gray in the comics because for some weird reason you couldn't make black people black. But in 1972, you get two characters that kind of blow everything up. And one of them, and these comics, by the way, I'm doing them from like month to month. So this, I'm just showing you guys January right now. In January, you get John Stewart. You get, of course, the Green Lantern that most teenagers and millennials know. They do not know Hal Jordan. Hal Jordan is one of my favorites, but John Stewart, this is where you get John Stewart, the Green Lantern, who takes over for Hal Jordan.
Kicking his ass, no less.
Oh, yeah, this is a great issue drawn by, like, Neil Adams, Denny O'Neil comic. This one, unfortunately, I could not find. I had to go online and buy this one. And it pained me because I did see it at a comic convention, but the guy wanted like so much money for it that it was killing me, and I couldn't do it. But this comic right here, this is to me a culturally significant thing because it allows me to see myself in comics and not just as and really he's still
sidekick, secondary character.
Because in this
even
one,
Robbie Robertson,
in this one he's actually more competent than Hal Jordan. Hal Jordan is kind of bumbling around doing everything kind of in a way where it's like, listen, I know what I'm doing, I'm right, blah blah blah. But the Guardians, in their infinite wisdom, they give him a ring and they're like, hey, you need to go train this guy. And Hal doesn't want to do it. Hal has, he can't be bothered. But by the end of the comic, John Stewart, he proves his worth, and he's right. He is right at the end of the comic, and that's what made it great. And it's it's absolutely not a perfect comic. And I talked to like Neil Adams one time at a convention, which if you guys can't get to conventions and talk to Neil Adams, you should do, because he's kind of an ass. But but you should talk to him. But,
you're not the only person close to Comics Pros who's mentioned that.
Yeah, he's kind of an ass. But he was telling me that when they were coloring the comic, the colorists didn't want to color him brown. They wanted to like I can't remember.
Can't we make him purple or something?
Yeah, they wanted to make him like not brown. They wanted to make him like they had done before, like this weird grayish color, or not brown. Like they would. It was always some weird color. And Neil Adams, or at least the way he tells it, he's like, no, color him brown. He is a black man. Color him brown. And the colorist, he says, said like, well, won't that make them mad? And it was like, and they were like, he was like, no, because they'll see a brown person in the comic and they will understand it. You don't have to like, you don't have to hold back. You can make a brown person brown and people will appreciate it.
Novel
There's
concept.
also that chalk yellow that Asian characters got too. Remember that?
Yeah, it's like no one could ever be like a normal color. It was always like they would have to be like kind of like the cipher color for something else. If you were black, you got to be gray, or
There's the coloring process really didn't help anybody in this because with the 4-color process, to get a white person, all you did was just have red dots on otherwise uncolored, and you got this kind of pink.
Right.
And they found the pink that sort of visually works for that.
Yep.
Whereas for anything else, you had to have different mixes of different dots and different which colors you were going to mix together. You could put dots on solids. There's hundreds of colors.
Well, and that's evident
the trouble
too.
Is then you have to keep it consistent from panel to panel to panel, and the labor intensiveness just jumps up. Again, this isn't apology. It is so much of saying what on earth was on people's minds, that it was okay to cut the corner.
Right. Well, they should have just stopped printing in Michigan. Everyone should have stopped printing in Michigan.
Right.
And the thing is, it's really evident too, like what you're saying, because once they started doing prestige format comics in the 80s with, in Baxter paper and all that stuff.
Right.
Before, and they would just do the same kind of printing process, and it really showed up when you put
it on. Awful. It was awful.
But I want to jump in here.
Yeah, that's the first. That was the one that that one, and probably Luke Cage, Hero for Hire, which also
has to be.
George
Jackson, Muhammad Ali, and Superman.
Yep, and so
because he is identical to the original Superman,
right?
His powers and everything. Yeah,
but no, that's pretty much January of 1972.
Yeah,
Jerry was like,
wake up, people!
Yeah. Exactly.
Jerry, I wanted to follow up on something you were talking about. Your personal experience of seeing a character like yourself. This is exactly the William Foster's book. And if you don't know William Foster, you should.
Okay.
But his book is called, I just had it up here, Looking for a Face Like Mine.
Right.
By the way, that's a great name. You recognize, of course, that's a great name for that author.
Yeah. Because William Foster, same name as Black Goliath.
Yep.
But Bill Foster has been one of the longest serving and most distinguished scholars about Black comic books in America.
Mm-hmm.
He teaches in Connecticut at a community college in Connecticut, but he's a man of many talents. He's like a black belt martial artist and a performer and all kinds of stuff. But this particular book, Looking for a Face Like Mine, is specifically about his experiences as a kid reading comics.
I read an interview about it.
Yeah. He's done a lot of interviews on when they did like documentaries on Black superheroes. You've seen him in shows. Anyway, should I move on to 68?
Well, hold on. Do we have enough time? Does everyone have time?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is great. Yeah.
Okay, go for it, man. Let's hit me with it, because you hit me with it in the email, and it really made me jealous, because that issue, I was like, dang it, that's a great issue.
All right. Well, so I love 68. It was a big time for both DC and Marvel. DC was feeling the pressure from Marvel's success, and they made a bunch of changes. So a lot of the older artists were cashiered out, and new people were brought in an attempt.
It was also the clinching of the Warner Brothers merger.
Yes, that's correct.
And so huge editorial.
Yeah. So people like Otto Binder were let go, and Siegel was let go, and Wayne Boring was let go, and all the sort of old guys that had been. I say old, not in the sense of their physical age. I don't know how old they were.
Right.
Some of them were pretty old.
Like the previous generation, of artists were let go, and new people were coming on, and those included a lot of people from the Charlton group that came along with Denny O'Neil and all that crowd.
Yep, Dick Giordano.
Exactly.
Giordano in particular from Charlton.
Yeah,
O'Neil and Wolfman and Wine. Roy Thomas actually had his first job at DC.
Well,
he lasted like a week or something because he hated it so much. Yeah.
So the person who got their first gig in 1968 was 16-year-old Jim Shooter.
Yep.
Who writes his first comics at the age of 60 for DC, writing Legion of Superheroes in Adventure Comics. And but anyway, Other stuff that was pretty interesting from this time period too is the first issue of Zap Comics, which of course is Robert Crumb's launch of the independent alternative comics movement. It came out in February of 1968. It was supposed to come out a couple of months earlier, but his original issue got basically stolen by the publisher. Wow. And he had to completely redraw his first issue.
Goodness.
Those pages appeared. Those pages were found later. Xeroxes of them were found later, and he re-inked them later in '68. But the first issue came out in about February of 1968, and it was sold out of a baby carriage on the streets of San Francisco in the Haight-Ashbury district.
Awesome.
He had about 3,000 sold out of that baby carriage. Then later, of course, it became a huge movement, and he brought in other artists, and they all kind of jammed together in Zap Comics.
Zap continued to publish all the way up through the 2000s.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And Fantagraphics did a beautiful, like 4-volume collected edition of it. But anyway, so going back and looking at Zap, it's a super problematic book. On the one hand, it's incredibly inventive. On the other hand, it's also, it's just super problematic. His depictions of Black Americans and women and those books.
I would say confrontational rather than problematic, but I tend to see this in many ways as I see this as important, that the nature of any number of Crumb's work in particular, but he's certainly not alone.
Yeah.
The authentic outpouring of trauma,
right,
is and the fact that we live in a society in which I experience these tensions, and I'm going to share these tensions to you. This is what you've done to me. This is how I look at Black people. This is what you've done to me.
Yeah, the single most
has much more power to it than just, I think, a caricature that is criticizable as racism.
The single story in Zap 1 that holds together the best is White Man.
Yep.
Which is obvious.
I must maintain this rigid posture.
He's drawn like Clark Kent, but he's constantly giving in to these secret lust, anger, and fear, and he's trying to keep them all bottled inside him. And it's very much a book. The whole book is about repression.
Right. Huh. See, I've read some art but never that one.
Anyway, so it's take a look at it, and you can make up your own mind about it. Speaking of first appearances of Black characters in comics, Franklin appears in the strip Peanuts.
That's right.
In 1968, he's the first Black character in Peanuts.
Right.
Franklin, he's what's interesting about it is that he doesn't go to school with the other characters, of course.
Right.
Because schools are still segregated.
Right.
And Schultz Schultz tells this great story. He's written about it where he got a letter from a woman who was a teacher, and she said, I'd really like you to introduce a Black character to the strip. And so idea, in other words, Franklin was the idea, the germ for Franklin comes from a reader who asked him to do it. And so he did. But when he started to publish the strip, he got hate mail from Southern readers who said, I don't care that you make a Black character, but you can't show them going to school together.
Right.
and so, of course, he'd already done it. So he didn't even bother to answer the letter. But it kind of shows, it was interesting because Franklin becomes sort of a straight man. Because he shows up and all the characters have all these weird, bizarre lives, and Franklin's like, he just really knows what to make of all these people. Like, you're all kind of. But he gets along well with them, and so he likes hanging out with them. But he's surprised by Linus's blanket and what's all this great talk, and you white folks are crazy. Is basically what we get, from the. He doesn't say that obviously, but that's kind of what the strip is about. But when I went looking at my particular, more specifically in April of 1968, there were a couple of interesting books. This is when Marvel was transitioning from having titles that had kind of generic names like Tales to Astonish, and moving them into names, into books named after the headline characters.
Yep.
So a couple of those happened in April. One of those, is Incredible Hulk moves with its 102nd issue to Incredible Hulk titled. So Incredible Hulk suddenly goes to 102. It's the first.
Yes.
There's no Incredible Hulk 101.
Right. That was standard practice at the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And
DC
that
was particularly guilty of that all the time. Yeah.
That is the issue that is written by the writer you were talking about earlier. Gary Frederick, yeah. And it's Hulk is like trapped in Asgard. And he's like hanging out with the Warriors 3 and the Enchantress and the Executioner. And he single-handedly stops the troll invasion of Asgard. Yeah, as one does.
Yes.
And but the most interesting writing in that particular issue is the Warriors 3. They go to seek out this oracle to tell them, like, who is this strange green Goliath and what does he mean for Asgard? And they call up this woman. This oracle shows up and she speaks only in rhyme.
Okay.
So it's like we gotta get this woman and demon together.
What rhymes with Hulk?
Yeah.
Bulk probably.
Bulk is a giveaway. Bulk is a giveaway though. Once you do that one, then where do you go from there?
Yeah, but she actually speaks only in rhyme for about 4 or 6 pages, and it's actually pretty good.
Friedrich was a good writer. Those guys were really literate, like, all of them.
Yeah, the rhythm and rhymes are pretty good. And it was apparently his first regular gig. Pardon me.
This is like you being in your classes when this happens, right? How do you like that?
I always told my students I'd answer it for them.
Yeah. I told them that there was a button that turned it off.
Yeah, no, I didn't expect
a button that turns it off. And they'll look at me like, there is not.
No one calls me. I don't get phone calls. Okay? Let's be absolutely honest. Anyway, the other issue, and the one that I mentioned to Jerry earlier, is Captain America number 100. So Cap 100 came out. It was the transition from Tales to Astonish to Captain America. It begins as the Hulk did, and this is clearly something that they were doing. They were recapping the origins of the character in the first few pages. But then the entirety of Cap 100 is this long run and gun. They're trapped in Baron Zemo's base, pursued by Zemo and his various minions. And they're constantly being overwhelmed, and they're just constantly traveling and running, and they have to keep avoiding ambushes. And in classic Kirby fashion, it's like basically action from panel 1 all the way to
You say they. Is the Falcon involved in this one?
No, no Falcon. This is Black Panther.
Oh, right.
His side.
The phase nobody remembers. Yeah.
Right.
And Agent 13 is there. And Agent 13 has been disguised as one of Baron Zemo's sidekicks. and so at the beginning of the issue, Zemo is ordering her to shoot Cap, and she's like, "Yes, sir." And her brain is thinking, I can't, right? And it's all about setting up that romantic tension. And Cap hasn't recognized her because she's in disguise with her glasses, right?
Oh,
yeah,
definitely.
She's got glasses on, so he'd never recognize her.
Right.
And her hair's up in a.
Can we reveal who we really are?
That's it. I don't really just take.
No, we dare not. Yeah.
That's right.
And so it's funny that in the fight, like in one panel, like she punches some soldier in the face, and her hat comes off, and her glasses fly away. Right. And then the next panel, he's like, Agent 13.
I love it. I love it.
Please tell me that you guys can actually like recognize women better than that. Like.
Right.
I make. Anyway,
I'm not going to make the 7 jokes that just heard.
Right.
I'm so not going to do it, and neither of you are either. Okay,
that's right. Just put them all back in there.
I was struck as I was reading.
Yes, and move on.
We see Black Panther, and Black Panther is kind of like Cap's ally sidekick in this issue, and Cap is always kind of commenting to himself about how impressed he is by the Black Panther.
Right.
And it's very interesting because Panther doesn't think to himself, "Wow, Cap's so awesome."
Right. Yeah.
It's always the other way around. It's
Jason,
always
who's the writer on that?
It's got to be Jack Kirby, right?
It's a Lee Kirby thing.
No, Kirby didn't do any had no single author credits until he came back in the late 70s.
Right. It's just billed as a Lee Kirby comic.
So this is Lee and Kirby. Okay.
Yeah.
Whatever this may mean. Right.
Yeah. And the storyline has a couple of spots where Panther kind of takes the lead. One of these is the point where they're crawling through these air tunnels, and they knew that they're going to get ambushed. And so Panther was like, "Oh, let my hunter's instincts take over." And he sneaks out in front because I'm better at detecting ambushes than everyone else.
Yeah, that's
I'm an Indian. I mean African. I mean,
yeah. And it's interesting that when he does that, in previous times that we've seen the Panther, his eyes are just white. They're just completely blanked out, right? Like storms. Or if we were looking closer, you can see pupils.
Right, the little dots. Yeah.
But it's just like a black dot in a white space.
Well, that's a classic 60s style.
But when he says, "Oh, let me go in front now because my hunter's senses will let me detect an ambush," you can see the brown around his eyes.
Yeah.
And it's like he's sort of showing he's silent for blackness will allow me to detect ambush.
Seriously, that's exactly what's going on.
Yeah. And then at the very end of the book, it's interesting because they take down Zemo. They reveal that it's not actually Baron Zemo because Baron Zemo is dead. Everybody knows that, and characters don't come back from death in Marvel comics.
Ooh, I think I'm remembering something. Go on.
So they reveal that it's not actually Baron Zemo. It's just Baron Zemo's pilot, who basically
his pilot. Well, like his chauffeur.
Yeah.
Oh no! To me, I'm so.
Yeah, Baron Zemo's chauffeur, the super robot and everything, but there's still like a whole base full of goons. Like there's literally dozens of them drawn in every panel, and if they attacked Cap and Black Panther and Agent 13, it's been established in the book, in the story, that they would all lose because they're just so outnumbered.
Right.
But Panther walks up and he says, "Your boss is defeated. Goals have failed. You should all surrender." And they're like, "You're right."
You know what?
We should.
Present attack.
What's that?
But you know what? That's technically that's Cap's speech.
Yes.
So
but he doesn't get it.
Panther gets
it. In fact, not only does Panther get it, but Cap thinks to himself, "What a natural leader. He's like a walking king."
There you go.
And of course we know that the reason why this story wraps up the way it does is because we're on the last page. And we don't have any more room for him to clean the clock of 25 more goons.
Right.
But it's a really interesting kind of, Panther comes up and resolves things non-violently. And everybody lays down their guns and they all surrender. And
a natural king.
A natural king.
Now,
not like monarch,
yeah,
who sits on a throne, but a man named King. So yeah.
Yep. But also true, actually, yeah, that there could be some subtext there too. But did Cap?
I call it text in that case. But
yeah, you kind of really have.
Yeah.
Did he know that? Does Captain America actually know? Because I know that the Fantastic Four knew, but does Cap know that he's the? Because actually, I don't think a lot of them did know until like the late 70s who or what Black Panther was.
Well, I have to go back and check when Panther first shows up in Captain America, but he talks about being African in the comic.
Okay.
And as I say, his blackness is illustrated.
Right, but he's asking whether he knows he's T'Challa.
Yeah.
Wakanda.
Oh, does he know he's a king?
Yeah. Does he know that he is the king
that's
of
a good
Wakanda?
question. That I don't know.
And also, frankly, taking that level of the character knows, taking that level of textual understanding of the characters at that point is pretty dubious.
Right.
I mean, it's kind of like whatever the writer wanted to make of it in the moment.
Yeah.
Is
see, now I'm gonna have to go back and get that one. See, now I want that issue. Now I need that issue. Well,
you struck my, as an artist. Well, of course, I read it from Comixology, right? Like I spent $1.99 and bought it. But as an artist, what you'll notice when you look at it is how physically present Kirby's special effects are.
Right.
Like, in other words, the line, the zip lines, the motion lines, the action lines that he draws, they fill the panel.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost like you could reach out and touch them. There are whole panels that are nothing but a guy's face, a fist, and just lines everywhere.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. No,
yeah. It's really sort of classic Kirby art. I don't want to say necessarily at his prime, because I would not presume to judge when Kirby's prime was, but it's
sometimes
classic.
Fast Kirby is just as interesting as awesome, meticulous Kirby.
Yeah. No, trust me.
For different reasons.
Yeah. Looking at like my stack of like 72 comics and all the Kirby comics that are in there, like he was drawing like 5 comics at the same time. And they were coming out every month. Like, and it's crazy, but yeah, that's awesome. I need that issue now. I need that. I got to see it.
Lindsay, are we leaving you out? Was there stuff you wanted to say on this stuff at all?
No, I'm actually just really fascinated. I'll admit that Black Panther is one that I haven't read quite as much of. But I'm always really amused whenever I do read it, in that he does get to kind of have this, in a way, superiority over some of the other characters. And I think that that's really interesting, in that, obviously, as he is the first Black character, correct? Or
not quite.
He is the first Black super. Well, he's the first mainstream Black superhero character, because there were 4 written back in like the 50s and 40s.
There were,
but they never. They were never at. They never got to the big time. And the cool part about like Black Panther is that, unlike a lot of characters, and to their credit, Jack Kirby and like Stan Lee's credit, Black Panther never played second fiddle to anyone in these early comics. Now, in later comics, like toward like the later, like in the like the late 70s and like early 80s, when Black Panther would just show up, or when he even became like a social worker at a high school at one point.
Yeah.
Like, it was like, that's when you're like, fuck Black Panther, goddamn, you're the king of Wakanda. But, by then it fell into the whole, I'm trying to help my community thing, which really drove me crazy about a lot of Black characters, is that.
My claim, oh, sorry, Jerry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that, unlike a lot of like, white characters, like a lot of like the earlier Black characters, they never had agency to be a superhero or to be a hero because it was the right thing to do. It was always that they were trying to fix some shit that was wrong or broken, that they may or may not have had a hand in. Like, for instance, like Falcon, who, just doesn't start off as the Falcon, who later, became like a social worker. But, when he shows up, his name is Snap. What's his name? He's like a hustler. Right, and I'm like, like,
okay,
you know what I mean? Or when Luke Cage shows up, they're always doing stuff in their community because they have to fix their community. Whereas Spider-Man was just a superhero because it's the right thing to do. But to their credit, a lot of these guys, what's that?
Well, hold on, guys. There's debates within debates.
He's motivated.
Roll on. But footnote noted.
Right. But what I'm saying is that a lot of like, and this goes into like Milestone too, and this is what tickled me about Milestone when those characters came out, is that they were good people who were doing the right thing, who happened to be people of color or women, or of different like sexual orientation. It wasn't because of that they had something to fix. It was just like, hey, I see something wrong. I will fix it. And really, if more people could understand that, instead of always, well, they don't really do it now. But this used to turn me off a lot about these characters. Is that they would do that they had to, if there was a Black person or a Latino or any person of color in a comic, they had to carry the weight for everyone, and they became basically the icon that everyone had to like. Okay, well, if there was a story about racism, it obviously had to involve like this character, Well,
the classic one for me in that regard is Cyborg and the Teen Titans,
right?
who, as I say, is one of the great Mocha characters.
Right.
Because anything and everything, I mean, is his dad wealthy scientist who can make the Teen Titans Tower, except that they live in this tenement because I guess that's where they do.
Well,
and I mean, it just goes on and on.
Yep.
Everything Blackish
right
goes in there, and it becomes this weird, smooth blend that means nothing.
Right. And like, and sometimes it's like, because to me, it's one of those things where you don't want to take away someone's like, like identity, because it's not like, Black people or women or gay people are one monolithic thing.
Yeah.
Right.
So like with, the question of like Storm, my biggest beef, it's not that Storm, isn't Black. It's just that they never allowed her to be anything but this kind of construction. This,
Right.
it's not like, it to me, it was interesting that, that, wow, she's like this like mutant who people thought was a goddess. Incredibly interesting. But then they do these things that kind of make her more palatable to I guess like the audience.
Well, she turns out to come from Harlem or something like that, or wherever it was.
Whatever.
And which made no sense. And it just goes on and on.
Yeah.
The whole thing just becomes.
But you've got like, really interesting characters that, to me, at least to me anyway, were really interesting. Like you had like what was it, Misty Knight?
Dropped like a rock in the early 80s.
Yeah, and and they both of them, like her and Sharon, like they disappeared. They got ghosted. Yep. But the thing is, and they were in like the early like X-Men, like the new X-Men comics. They would show up.
They actually go all the way back to Iron.
Yeah, of course. But and for Hero for Hire, they would show up. Mm-hmm. But they were really interesting characters that never really got to be interesting because people were too focused on trying to fix something that you could have easily fixed by just making them interesting characters. But instead, they have to be interesting.
I'll be stepping on lots of toes when I say this, but I think Chris Claremont's women and ethnic characters often they all often ran into this.
Well, they all had their catchphrase. Like anytime you wanted to make people remember that Nightcrawler was German, he would say "Mein Gott" or something, or Tovovich. Peter Rasputin would, because Chris Claremont obviously didn't know these languages. He probably just had like 3 words that he could bullet point and hit.
Bojmoy, and Tovovich.
Yeah, and it's like but. I appreciate they were there, but sometimes it was tone deaf. Like, we could go, like, remember Tyrock? The man who was from, Legion of Superheroes, where all the Black people, and they were good for doing this shit in Legion of Superheroes. Like, all the Native Americans left the planet and went to Starhome. That's where Dawnstar is from. Because, because obviously that's what would happen. Like, we would all just leave. Tyrock and his people... and if you don't know the story, Tyrock and all the Black people, because there was no Black people in Legion of Superheroes, they were all on an island, right?
Oh.
And no. It gets better.
Okay.
Not only are they not all on an island, but the island only shows up every 300 years. So the island disappears, and not because, white people put them there. It's because all the Black people just wanted to go to this island and stay there because...
I was going to say, they have their own places.
Yeah, they've got their own place that only shows up every 300 years. And
oh my God.
Hold on, it gets better. Because I love the Legion of Superheroes.
Make this stuff up. It's like unbelievable.
I love the Legion of Superheroes. I love them. I've got a thing upstairs. I love them. But then when Invisible Kid dies, the new Invisible Kid gets to be a Black guy. Yes. Because he's the Invisible Man. Yeah, he is the Invisible Man. And it's like the one person that I was hoping wouldn't be invisible gets to be the Invisible Kid. It's like he couldn't be like, he's a cool character. But he's the Invisible Kid.
Yeah.
Tyrock, the other Legion of Superhero, can only show up when his damn island shows up. And Dawnstar and all the Native Americans live on another planet that they all left.
There's a name. There's a word for that. You didn't say it.
What's that?
But there's a word for that.
What's that? Go ahead.
They live on the res.
Well, of course. It's true.
I mean,
but and the thing
that was kind of obvious.
I love the Legion of Superheroes But if you put any of the Legion of Superheroes in a bus and drove them through a tunnel and had just word balloons, you couldn't figure out who they were, because they were all
Right.
They were essentially all white suburban kids with superpowers.
Absolutely.
And then, like, by the 80s, like, it got a little bit edgier, and they started adding more weird characters, so you started getting not just...
They had pockets. They put pockets on their uniforms. Boy, did they put pockets.
Well, that was in the 90s when, like, they all got pockets. Yeah. And then, but, yeah, I just wished, you know, growing up, you kind of had to kind of swallow it and power through. And...
yeah, some representation is better than no representation, even if it's bad representation.
That first year of Hero for Hire, though, was not fucking around. Well, Billy Graham was, and the same thing with Panther's Rage. Billy Graham's the person to mention here. Yep. Billy Graham is one of the great artists, and he was actually the art editor for Creepy and Eerie, which were a huge part of comics culture. Yeah, sorry. But
I gotta pull it down and show it.
Oh, nice.
Go. Yeah, there it is. Yeah.
Nice.
Absolutely. I mean, hold it up a little more. We can see his beaten body lying on the cell floor. There, yeah.
But go on. What was that?
I was just going to say the bottom of the issue, which you didn't show, actually has his beaten body of the prisoner in prison with the guard feeding him. Yep. Yeah. And so the basis of Luke Cage and George Jackson and Muhammad Ali is just immense. Yeah. But the thing I'm getting at is Billy Graham, the art editor at Creepy and Eerie, also did art in the mainstream houses as well. And he was not just the inker in Hero for Hire, but was effectively a co-author or a prime mover. Right. Well, and so he's one of the great black presences in comics art, and he also did a great deal of the art, inking and/or pencils in Panther's Rage.
Right.
So it's really a big deal. Yeah, Billy Graham is.
Yeah, if you can find those issues, the Black Panthers, the Jungle Actions, I'm telling you, that comic should have been so much bigger than it was. But but Luke Cage,
too much. It was
Luke Cage is the one thing that if you read it now, you can see that it's essentially just kind of a superhero noir story, kind of in the same vein of like Shaft was just a noir with a black man in it.
Well, his face is built off of the secondary character, the second lead in Shaft.
Oh, is he?
Go and look at the. I mean, he's facially modeled completely off of the younger guy in Shaft.
Right. Yeah. I'll have to go back and look, but that's what it was to me. Because when you read them, that's what it reads like. It's like basically he's a hard-boiled detective who happens, to be an escaped prisoner trying to cover his tracks, and But it's kind of cool because there's a dynamic in the comic if you read it between the cop who's trying to catch him. Like the cop will come to him and it's like, hey, where were you 2 years ago? And he's like, oh, I got to get going. I got a case. But there's this whole thing where that runs through the first I think 20 issues where he's trying to put Luke Cage, basically figure out who Luke Cage really is. Luke Cage is always trying to dodge him because he doesn't want to go back to prison. But he's solving these crimes.
And there's scenes with them drinking coffee in his apartment.
Yeah, no,
and they're very naturalistic. I mean, this speaks to me. The Cage goes and he's got a saucepan.
Yeah,
and he puts it on his crappy stove. And boils the water, and he puts instant into the cups, and he pours you hold the saucepan and pour directly from it into the coffee cup. They actually have him do that, and he and the detective are sitting there drinking coffee together. And this kind of naturalistic depiction and humanism to the whole thing, all of the things that are wrong. That film student, DW, who's the white character, the white long hair who hangs out with Luke Cage, who's completely unnecessary, except that now you have a white character in the book, is really intolerable. And I just really wish. I mean, he's so reeks of junkie,
right?
That they never quite go there in the story, but he really does. But the kind of like Shaggy and Scooby Doo, he just reeks of it. But so but these books had with all their missteps, and you gotta do the caption thing when he says Christmas. He's saying, we know what he's saying.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, I mean, that it's not a joke because it's code. It's not supposed to be anything but code. But they really, I mean, I was reading them as a kid because I'm actually reading them in the day as a young reader, and I myself am wrapped up with things like the court case of the Soledad Seven. Even at that age, the court cases were in my county, and to me, this is like jumping off the page, lifestyles that I recognize. Now, I wasn't living in an urban Black neighborhood, but there were issues here that were explicit. You were saying there were things you missed when you were reading as a kid. Yep. I certainly missed a lot, but I lived in a very political household.
Right.
And it was explicit. Whenever you watch a TV show, whenever you read a comic, whenever you did, you knew what was going on. You knew what they were to. You were expected to. You were expected to critique it. I'm 10. Right. You're watching All in the Family, and it's like, you do not just watch this show. Right. This is to be discussed.
Right.
Did they do it well? Did they treat the issue fairly or not?
Right.
And so this was a big deal. I'm reading Marvel comics, and I was saying these things are way better than any shit for this. Nobody would believe me.
Right.
Right.
No, it was
especially in that. Yeah.
It was great. No, Luke Cage is a great comic, except for when they put in his villains, and
they're terrible.
Yeah, all of them were terrible, and the one issue,
Senor Suerte.
Yeah, the cockroach.
Oh God,
Black
the cockroach
Mariah.
with his shotgun. Oh my God.
Black Mariah.
They blew away. They kill people with a shotgun on panel.
Yeah.
In one of the most gruesome shots I've ever seen in a mainstream comic. They're literally blown apart on panel.
Yeah. Well, he's got a shotgun with
And I was like reading this, and I was like,
yeah,
what the fuck?
It's crazy. But do you guys remember? And maybe I'm the only one. Do you remember the issue? Because he never got to fight any really cool villains except one time. The Dr. Doom story. Now, do you
got to fight Dr. Doom?
Well, hold on. I'll explain Dr. Doom.
Story?
Oh, this is the best
story
ever.
I don't know this.
Oh, here we go.
Okay. This is hilarious.
Okay.
Yeah.
So anyway, this is what happens, because Luke Cage is the hero for hire, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this guy comes to his office and wants to give him a job. He's like, hey, I'm from Latveria. I need you to go track some people down in this neighborhood, and we can't send our people there. So, you being a Black man, you can go to this neighborhood and do the investigative works, right? So he's like, okay, it's going to cost like $300. I think it's $300, right?
200.
Was it 200? Okay. So he goes, he tracks the stuff down, and he finds out, I think they're Doom bots or something. And I can't even remember what the hell they're doing in this neighborhood, but he does the job, and he goes back, and he's like, hey, I figured out what was going on. Pay me my money, right? And the guy's like, it turns out that it's Dr. Doom, and I can't remember what the hell it's about, but it's so ridiculous. And Dr. Doom's like,
right, there's a real cockamamie backstory.
Yeah, it's so contrived. But then Dr. Doom is like, I'm not gonna pay you. And
he shorts them $200.
Yes, Dr. Doom, the monarch of Latveria. Right?
Yeah, he's a king.
Yeah, he basically skates. He goes back to Latveria, right? Leave it.
Wait
Luke
for
Cage,
it. Wait
right?
for it.
Luke Cage is like, I'm gonna get my fucking money, right? Luke Cage. This is the best. Luke Cage goes to the Fantastic Four tower, right? He goes to the Baxter Building, breaks in, and wants to steal the pogo plane, right? And so then it turns into a fight with the Fantastic Four, and they're like, what the hell are you doing? And he's like, listen, Dr. Doom owes me some money, and I'm going to go get my money, right? And they're like, so Mr. Fantastic is like, all right, go ahead, take the jet, right?
He's legit.
He's like, all right, go ahead. And so, like, Luke Cage is like, great. So evidently Luke Cage can fly a jet, which I didn't know, but he flies like the pogo plane to Latveria and like lands and just basically just runs like crazy. Like he just starts wrecking shit in Latveria all the way up to the castle, right? Dr. Doom's inside like, what the hell's going on? And they're like, yeah, there's this guy outside. He's wrecking stuff. And they're like, oh shit, that's It's Luke Cage, right? Luke Cage busts in. He's like, "What are you doing here?" And he's like, "You owe me some money." And he's like, "I'm not going to pay you the money." And then they talk for a while, and then at the end, like, Dr. Doom just gives him the money. He's just like, "Okay, listen, just take the money." But it's so ridiculous that they go through
the famous line is, "Where's my money, honey?"
Yeah.
And it's Luke Cage to Dr. Doom.
Yeah, but it's
"Where's
so
my
funny.
money, honey?"
And so the one time that he gets to fight Dr. Doom, it's because he stiffed him on a job he did. But it's so crazy because it runs for 2 issues, and I think it's a 2 issue.
It's when Englehart first came in on the title at that point, and somewhere just before or just after, and or it may be a first story in there, maybe.
Right.
It's like issue 6.
Yeah, it's like issue 8, 9, or something. It's
really early.
Yep.
Yeah, it's after the first arc with Archie Goodwin writing, and it's like, fill these pages.
Yeah, it is
sure
weird.
Basically, is all there is to it. Yeah.
You know, it is a weird story. You should read the stories. Yeah,
That's wild.
But yeah,
I will have to check that out.
Oh man, I'm gonna have to like just start sending you stuff from like from Amazon or Comixology, and just because these stories are nuts, and yeah, he fights some villains, like he fights like someone called Goldbug. There's one issue where he gets set up to go and steal some stuff from Tony Stark, and there's one line in there because Tony Stark hires him to basically check out the security of my facility. I'll pay you this money, go and see if you could break in. It's really not Tony Stark, it's someone else, blah, blah, blah. But there's this line where like he's hanging on the back of a truck that's going through the gates. He's like, "Thank goodness for my black skin, you know, because it's at night." He's like, "Thank goodness they can't see me in the dark." And he jumps off the side, the side of the truck, and sneaks in and does the stuff, and then you find out, it's not really Tony Stark, it's somebody else, blah blah blah. But that, like, because reading it now, when you read it, you're like, wow, you're like, yeah, that would probably never happen in real life, but okay, fair enough. We're it's
black people are invisible in the dark. Apparently, we're just gonna go with it.
Especially when you're wearing a bright yellow shirt.
I was gonna say, is he still like wearing his like bright yellow, like silver thing on his afro?
Exactly, he has a tiara and but in the dark, no one can see the Power Man. But there's a lot of great weird, funky stories, and Luke Cage was always good for the.
It's the weirdest mix of incredibly impressive and humanistic, and the utterly ham-handed and just throw it in plotting, and you're just going, what on earth, No,
it is. It's crazy. Okay, hold on. It's like it's 2:51 here. We've been going for like what, 3 hours?
2 hours. I gotta go soon. I gotta go in about 9.
Yeah, absolutely. We gotta wrap it up. But we should do this again. Because
I agree. I'm feeling stiffed. Can we, Jason, just give me a list of titles, for God's sake?
Well, this is what we're going to have to do. Oh, shit. That's right, Ron. Damn it. We haven't done you yet. Sorry, Ron.
Part 2.
That's right.
Well, I got to give a quick list.
Okay.
You mentioned launching the Undergrounds. That I beg to differ. That Zap was jumping in what was already a very rich culture of underground comics. And that the launch, technically, unless you want to go all the way back to Tijuana Bibles and stuff, but the launch of what we think of as the underground comics is with Dog Nose and The Adventures of Jesus, 2 different titles.
Dog Nose?
Dog Nose by Jackson, and The Adventures of Jesus by Gilbert Shelton, and what's his name? Fulbert, what's his name? The a famous artist. But anyway, so that's the year I was born is when those 2 were launched, and this is also the year of the Fantastic Four annual #2 with the origin of Dr. Doom. It's also when Daredevil, which was one of the very first. Then there's Fantastic Four back in '61. Daredevil unusually was launched in his own title book, which almost never happened.
Right.
And so that happened in '64 as well. there's a few other interesting things that were just pieces of different titles. The Doom Patrol, original Doom Patrol, had been launched the year before, just like the original X-Men, but this year, their second year, really cemented down what the Doom Patrol were going to do. It introduced the Brotherhood of Evil in the Doom Patrol, and the same year introduced the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants in X-Men. Magneto had appeared before, but not the Brotherhood. So now we got Wanda and Quicksilver.
Right.
And so this was a year with it's the two biggies though are those the Undergrounds and the Origin of Doctor Doom.
See,
we should because we could easily do a contrast and compare between the X-Men and Doom Patrol, because reading both of those, you can see, like, I mean, they are almost the same. Like, it's very, very clear. I mean, it's been talked about many times. People tend, I think, also to forget the team that did the Doom Patrol without missing a beat the entire run.
Right.
It's just amazing work. But technically, they didn't begin the year I was born.
Right.
It's just they really hit their stride that year. And a lot of stuff about what they were about. But it's and whereas the X-Men, in my opinion, faltered pretty quickly as a book,
right,
for a long time. It never really became a great superhero comic in an ongoing way. Its best side was its founding idea, and they did a lot less with it. There's one really good anti-racism story that Lee and Kirby did, but not much.
Right.
And so anyway, the whole year of 64, though, is also when it was undeniable that Marvel had arrived. I think that's one of the most important aspects of it, that it had been, the shitty little by-blow of Goodman Publications that only lasted as comics because Goodman's nephew held that office, and he wasn't going to throw Stan out on the street. Stan had retained 2 or 3 artists. Had only been able to retain 2 or 3 artists when they had to force to fire them all back in 1957.
Right.
And they were only permitted to have 8 titles on the newsstand.
Yep.
Because DC, or rather National Periodic Publications, owns distribution. So therefore, so DC Comics were like, in like Flynn, they were already, owned by their own distributor, whereas Marvel basically had to cut a really, really painful deal and could only have 8 titles ever on there.
Which they got around by doing them bi-monthly instead.
Yes, they did the bi-monthlies, and they also
16 titles, but they would only come out every other.
Yep.
Okay.
Right. And they also, of course, as we pointed out, relied very heavily on their anthologies.
Yeah.
So a lot of the stories didn't have their own title for a really long time. Well, anyway, at that point, though, in 1964, even with all these constraints, Marvel was undeniable. It caught fire. Doctor Strange, this is right when Doctor Strange was adopted by every, college campus.
Right.
It really, this was this is the year the Green Goblin was introduced. Or was it the year? Either that or just before that.
Because it's 1963 when Spider-Man shows up, right?
No.
Doesn't it?
Okay.
I believe
the issues for Spider-Man, I think, are like number 8 through number 19. So yeah. And so there's a lot of really, really interesting introductions in all these comics. Tons of villains who are now classic villains. Tons of secondary characters. Aunt Petunia is referred to for the first time.
Right.
And there's
who appears for the first time in the Milk story that Jerry.
Oh God.
Really?
Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Come full circle.
When she shows up, when Byrne draws her in the town, like that's the first time we ever actually saw Aunt Petunia.
Really?
Right.
Huh.
Right.
I'm curious to see now. I got to go back and read that again. And,